We live? Yeah, it seems I'm live. Hello there. Thank you for tuning in or watching later, as the case may be. I'm Utkarsh, and I'm here to cover some movie news today, and it is different from the videos I've tried before. As you can see, if you go to my channel, and the reason I'm trying this today, but there are many reasons, but the thing that prompted me uh, specifically just now is that I was watching a couple of other movie news channels, and I do follow film news quite a bit, both in written form and in video form. And it it has bothered me for some time, to see some of the trends in the way film news is covered and what is being given more or less emphasis. And today I just felt like, instead of just skewing on it and just thinking more and more about my frustration with how these things are usually done, I can just open up a stream myself and do it differently. I don't have streaming software or anything, uh, so I won't be able to place the movie news headlines and images that I would like to on screen right here. Um, Instead, I'm just streaming on my webcam, so all you get is my gorgeous face. Which does also mean, though, that you can just listen to this as a podcast if you want. Just ignore the video part. So, anyway, a couple of the topics that I am planning to cover, I have mentioned in the video description. A couple others I will bring up as we go. And yeah, the structure of the video will just be I keep going topic by topic, and giving my thoughts the on whatever the topic is that I'm discussing. So I will start with the first topic now, which is Warner Brothers Discovery's handling of Coyote versus Acme. So, just to catch up anyone who isn't familiar with the story already, uh, Warner Brothers was going to release this film, Coyote versus Acme, uh, an animated movie clearly inspired by the Roadrunner series, but instead of just being like a direct Roadrunner movie, it's actually an adaptation of a New Yorker article. So it's uh, it was going to be this weird, interesting project. Apparently, it was scoring really high in test scores. Everything seemed to be going really great, uh, except things never turned out great, as we've seen in the under the David Zaslav regime. So uh, his new head of Warner Brothers Animation uh, decided that the precedent that was already set by DC with Batgirl is great, and we don't need to care about art, and we don't need to care about what artists want with their art. We don't need to care about studio artist relations and those kinds of pesky things that just hold back the bottom line, apparently. And the best way to make money off this Coyote versus Acme film is to uh, just bury it and claim the tax break that you get for making a movie that you don't release, which is just such a wild aspect of the law that you can make something and then not release it and like consciously choose not to release it. It's not that something happened that forced you not to be able to release it, and because of that you are suffering damages, and so you're being granted a tax break by the government. You don't have to pay the amount of taxes you would usually have to. No, you choose not to release the movie that you had and not make the money off it that you would if it was in theaters, or if it was getting you subscribers or helping you retain subscribers on your streaming service, or if you have like ad supported tiers on your streaming service, then whatever ad revenue it would make you, whatever different ways you could make money from this movie, selling Blu-rays, renting it out, you choose not to make money from your movie in those ways. And on the merit of that choice, you get a tax break. That's just the wildest incentivization ever. And this is something that people have been talking about for quite a long time, ever since Batgirl happened, really. Batgirl and Scoob 2 were shelved despite having been filmed in their entirety. Uh, and that's the similar situation with Acme versus Coyote versus Acme. It was uh, like the production phase was already done a year ago. It was deep into post production, practically done, uh, and then it got shelved. Uh, so, with this kind of incentivization structure that we all realize is messed up, most of us realize is messed up, the news that is uh, happening now is that there is an actual US politician, Texas Representative Joaquin Castro, who is actually trying to do something about this, because if if he is to be believed, this might not just be deeply unethical, which it clearly is, it might even be illegal in a way. So here's the tweet, and I'll just call it tweet because we don't yet have a good replacement word for tweets. So his tweet reads: the WBD tactic, WBD of course stands for Warner Brothers Discovery. The WBD tactic of scrapping fully made films for tax breaks is predatory and anti competitive. As the Justice Department and FTC revise their antitrust guidelines, they should review this conduct. As someone remarked, it's like burning down a building for the insurance money. And that's such a great comparison, because that's part of the deal with insurance, right? When you get insurance, the idea is that for a certain kind of insurance, the idea is that if you find yourself in a certain kind of trouble that you couldn't have helped, or something terrible befalls you, you no, it doesn't have to ruin you. Instead, you can get support that helps you glide through that relatively unharmed. You're still harmed, but you don't have to suffer the full brunt of the damage because you have some insurance, you have some cushioning, and that makes sense. That's a great deal. But that's why with insurance, there in order to not incentivize people to directly consciously harm their own assets, to destroy their cars or whatever is going on, to kill people in case of life insurance, uh, in order to be able to claim the benefits, to disincentivize that, you have rules that say that if you consciously do this, if you do this yourself, if it's not something that befell you, that was outside your power, then you're not going to get the benefits from it. And the exact same situation is happening here. It's wild that you would be given a tax break for something that you chose, for money that you're not able to make because you just decided you're not going to make that money. So that is a really good comparison that he has drawn. He is uh, calling upon the Justice Department and FTC to have a look into this practice. Now, uh, regardless of whether the law recognizes this as a problem or not, we're currently talking about US law, and uh, any of my viewers who are not Americans will especially realize, though hopefully even any American viewer should realize, that American law is not typically very good at keeping corporations in check. It is very pro corporation typically, and anti art, anti labor, anti the people, to put it kindly. Uh, so I would not say that there is much hope that they can do much about this. But regardless of what the law ends up saying, where the law ends up falling, at the very least, on an ethical basis, I think the comparison that he has drawn is valuable because it should help clarify in a lot of people's heads exactly uh, why, or I mean, there are many reasons why, but another reason exactly why what's being done right now and the precedent that's being set right now is so unethical and so dangerous and so harmful. Um, Now, the good news is that because of public pressure, because so many people hated what was done here, the bullying has worked. Warner Brothers has decided to no longer bury it for tax breaks, but instead they're going to uh, try to sell this movie to some other distributor who might want to pick it up, which is nice. At least people get to watch the movie. It's wild that there's like a Looney Tunes related thing that Warner Brothers will not distribute. They are not doing wonders for their own brand image at this point. But it's kind of similar to what Paramount did by losing out on Star Trek Prodigy when they decided last year to take it off their own streaming service and instead shop it around, and they ended up selling it to Netflix. So, I mean, first of all, they canceled the show. So there was that, but also the season that exists and the season that's already completed and about to be released, that will now be on Netflix. And so it's like, Paramount wants to be seen as the place where you go to watch Star Trek, but one of the best Star Trek shows in the last decade is not with them right now. So they are also hurting themselves really when they do this. So yeah, we've seen Warner Brothers fall into the same trap right now, but at least it's a win for the public outcry. It's a win compared to the alternative, which was that Coyote versus Acme was going to go the way of Batgirl and Scoop 2. And uh, yeah, I guess we can be glad that that did not happen. That should not mean that we stop being furious. Cannot wait for the day that David Zaslav and people with his mindset and his approach to running movie studios get out of this business. And maybe it's just the naive optimist in me, but I do think that day will come. I don't think any of what's happening right now is sustainable. Which brings me to the end of my thoughts on this first topic. So I will continue on with the second topic that I want to talk about today, which is the actor strikes, the SAG-AFTRA strike against the the major studios, like seven or eight of the big Hollywood studios. The of course the big five that we typically know of: Sony, Disney, Paramount, Warner Brothers Discovery, and Universal, and also a couple of the bigger streamers, Netflix, Prime. So that strike has just ended tentatively, uh, with the idea being that now uh, actors can go back to work, but in a couple of weeks they might just resume the strike if it turns out that the deal that the SAG-AFTRA negotiating committee reached with the studio's own negotiating committee, the AMPTP, uh, if it turns out that that deal is something that is not okay with the union at large, with SAG-AFTRA. Uh, and in that whole conversation of, what's the deal and what were the compromises reached, what were the wins and losses, the latest development is that there seem to be a lot of concerns about protections and provisions relating to artificial intelligence in this contract. And that's frustrating because it's not like this is the starting point of what's wrong here, right? Because if you have been following these negotiations over the last few weeks, the picture that seemed to be painted by the SAG-AFTRA negotiating committee was that uh, they are struggling on the issue of residuals and they're struggling on the issue of AI. And by the end, it seemed like they had to give in on residuals, instead settling for just a streaming participation bonus, which only covers the most successful streaming shows, like the top few of them, and is only a bonus really. So it doesn't do the job that residuals are there to do, which is to make acting a kind of career where you have like a sort of monthly income based on the work you've done. Um and so it's not like, oh, for a couple of months you are in between projects and now suddenly you don't have any cash inflow. So that is supposed to be the job of residuals, and that's not being done. And the idea seemed to be that, okay, we settle on the issue of residuals, and instead push harder and really stand our ground on the issue of AI, so that we don't let the studios get away with the way they want to be able to use AI to replace actors and to take away any power that the actors have in uh, this work dynamic. And that was the picture that was painted. They told us about a couple of the most horrendous things that the studios were asking for, like the zombie clause that you might have heard of. If you haven't, I don't have time to go into it right now, but do look it up. It's pretty ghastly. Uh, and so they mentioned those and they said that no, we won't let this pass. We will stay on strike if you insist on this. And then it seemed like the studios capitulated, and the actors seem to have won that deal. And that is why everyone thought the strike is ending now. But as more details are coming out and more details are being kept from coming out, uh, it appears that it might not be so rosy. It seems like only those few worst uses of AI have been guarded against, but many major ways in which AI can be used in ways that are anti-labor, that hurt actor professions, uh, are not being protected against, are continuing. They continue to be there. There aren't any reasonable protections against misuse, and so my primary source for this is Justine Bateman. She's primarily known for being an actress, though now she's also a writer director. She wrote the wrote and directed the movie Violet, starring Olivia Munn, which came out a couple of years ago and got fairly good reviews. I haven't seen it yet, but it sounds really fascinating, and I would like to watch it soon. Uh, she's a very respected voice among the actor community because she has been working for a long time, even before the strike started, on just studying in depth the way AI works and the ways it is threatening labor rights across the board, not just for actors, but like in general. And she has got an understanding of what kinds of protections workers need and what you can and cannot settle for and things of that nature, the intricacies. And so now that this deal is done and SAG-AFTRA has only released a summary so far to the actors, the larger body, the union, does not currently have, or uh, at least last I checked, until a few hours ago at least, they did not have access to the full deal. Um, and based on what has been provided, she has been providing her thoughts on what's happened, and it is very concerning. Sorry if you can hear the barking near my place. That's what happens when you make a video in the morning. So yeah, she posted this fairly long, but not that long. You can read it. I would encourage you to read the whole thing in detail. I'm only going to pick up a couple of concerning points from her thread. But she posted this thread on X, in which she discusses what her concerns are, what does not seem to have been covered. So one of those things is the exceptions that were made. So the idea is that the SAG-AFTRA got a deal from the studios where they need actors' consent, and they need to pay actors in order to use their digital replicas, but with a couple of exceptions. And those exceptions seem to be bigger than they should be. So, for instance, one exception is that if you get a digital double of yourself made, if you have consented to that in a movie, and then that double, your scan, basically your facial and body scan, is being used in post production to change aspects of your performance, aspects of your facial expression, of your body, your postures and stuff, your body language. All of that does not need to be run through the actors. Those are things. I mean, the terminology just seems to say minor changes, but that seems to be up to the studio's discretion, up to the uh, filmmaker's discretion, not filmmaker as in like directors and all. Again, the studio that's making the movie, up to their discretion, what constitutes as a minor change. And so they can literally change an actor's performance without having to get consent from the actor in terms of any specific change. So that is worrying, because a movie, when it comes out after it's been made, it's not just serving the interests of the studio and making it money, it's also acting as an entry in an actor's portfolio. It also serves as a, a window through which people see who this actor is and how they perform. And so, facial expression choices an actor would never have made, body language choices an actor would never have made, maybe forced upon their performance without their consent, uh, which seems pretty messed up, and that can possibly hurt people's careers. And then beyond that, you have uh, other minor changes that can be made, like their costumes can be changed in post production. And there are then questions of like, what exactly are actors protected from? What if their character is made to wear some religious iconography that the actor would not have consented to wearing had the actor's permission been asked? Uh, so, things of that nature, it's very unclear what the degrees of protection there are. Then I'm skipping through some of her thread. There's very important stuff that you should absolutely go and look up. In fact, you know what? I'll put a link to the thread in the description of this video. But later down that thread, Justine talks about the issue of synthetic performers, AI objects. Almost the entire conversation around AI has only centered digital replicas, where you use AI to create a replica of a specific actor. But that only covers concerns that an individual actor might have with what a studio is doing. But for the actor community at large, a concern arises when a studio just creates an entire new person from thin air to serve as like extras in a movie, to play minor roles where you don't need human actors, like performance nuances. I'm not saying you actually don't need it. Of course, good filmmakers will realize that even for the tiniest roles, you do need every little nuance to be right, to be just right, so as to not be immersion breaking, so as to do the job every scene needs to do. But for a studio which is just trying to cut costs and uh, doesn't maybe understand the nuances of filmmaking, they might think that you don't need a human actor to be involved in a smaller role. And if they are then given the permission, which it seems like they are right now, because there doesn't seem to be any protection against it. If they are given the permission to create entirely, like from scratch, uh, AI digital objects which are not replicas of any specific human actor, but they just look like random human beings, then that is, you must, like, we've all heard the phrase AI stealing our jobs, but this is very literally AI stealing actor jobs. One of the biggest responsibilities that the SAG-AFTRA negotiating committee had was to represent the interests of the bulk of the union, which is made up of those smaller actors who do a lot of bit parts, who play a lot of extras in a lot of different films and shows. And their interest is not being served if now every time they go into an audition, they have to compete not just with other people, but with this really presumably cost effective uh, AI extra that a studio can just fill up their mise en scène with. So that is a serious concern that I hope is addressed. And honestly, the only way it could be addressed is if actors currently vote no, and that lets the negotiating committee, then go back into the negotiating room and get these concerns addressed. But that seems unlikely right now. But I'll just bring up one other concern. This one was not brought up by Justine Bateman. I mean, maybe she also brought it up, but I saw it brought up by another actress, Kate Bond, who uh, talked about, and who has inquired SAG legal uh, in specifically about the issue of uh, recourse, which is basically instead of getting, so okay, I'll explain it this way. SAG-AFTRA initially wanted a veto on a lot of uses of AI. That if a studio intends to use digital replicas a certain way, SAG can just veto it before it happens. Instead, all they got was consent and remuneration. And the trouble with that is that, well, not a trouble yet. The next step with that is to ask, okay, suppose consent is violated, an actor sees that the way that their replica has been used goes against the terms or goes beyond what they consented to, then what is the recourse? So Kate Bond mentions many different ways this could happen. For instance, non-consensual nudity is something that now actors will have to worry about. Just add on to their already existing pile of nightmares. Why don't you? So yeah, then the question becomes, okay, now what is their recourse? What can they do to uh, you know a get things fixed? Can they, like, get the movie or TV show that's already been made, can they get it changed? Because it broke consent because so far it seems like the only uh, thing that they'll be entitled to is money from the studios, uh, a financial penalty. So that does not seem enough to assuage any actor's worries in this case. Like, sure, the damage was done and now I got some money. That's barely a disincentive for a studio which wants to use an actor's replica in ways that they know an actor will never consent to. That's barely covering what uh, an actor needs if they have been violated in such a way. And the thing that violated them, a product that was made, the work of art that was made, uh, just continues to exist. So, Kate Bond has framed all of these as questions because right now the issue is that these things are unclear, and they will stay unclear until the exact wording, the entire contract is provided to the actors. And the fact that the contract hasn't been provided yet is itself an issue because, as she points out, uh, voting on the deal seems to be starting before people get access to the contract, before they get to read the contract. So it seems like the effort is to get a lot of actors in the union to vote based on a summary of the contract provided by the negotiating committee, uh, instead of on the basis of the actual contract or on the basis of summaries of the contract provided by third parties, disinterested third parties. So in the absence of that, these are the concerns that are brought up because the summary at least does not address them. The summary does not tell them exactly what kind of recourse an actor will be able to get if their consent has already been violated, which I think is an essential question to ask. So bravo for Kate Bond raising that question. And yeah, so I would suggest that you follow Justine Bateman and Kate Bond and keep up with uh, how these negotiations proceed, how this issue proceeds. It might not. Uh, it's possible that despite all these concerns being discussed, and they're being discussed fairly widely right now, they might not be able to sway a lot of actors' votes. If you remember a few months ago when it seemed like the directors union, DGA, might also have to go on strike, uh, there was a contract that was agreed upon, and a lot of directors. I think most prominently, I remember Scott Derrickson, but quite a few of others were very vocal about, like, here are all the problems, here are all the things that this contract doesn't cover, and it leaves us very vulnerable. And as I was saying, I highly recommend following what happens with the strike, with these discussions, uh, with the directors thing. We already saw that all that conversation about the limitations of the deal did not end up being sufficient to motivate directors to vote against the deal. And so the directors union just ended up accepting a shitty deal, and they didn't end up going on strike. And now it is possible that the same thing happens with actors, but it is still, regardless of whether this push ends up working or not, it is still a very important part of film. I do believe that, if you're someone who's following movies, it's not enough to just watch the movies themselves. The process of production of art, the conditions of production are very relevant in how we understand any kind of art. And yeah, so that's the latest on that. Now, before I get to the rest of the major stuff I want to discuss, just a little quick rundown I want to do of a few relatively minor news things that have been happening that I am invested in. So I'll just mention them. off the top here. So uh, I guess it doesn't count as off the top if I'm not doing this at the beginning of the video. Anyway, uh, the Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow film has a screenwriter attached. Anna Noguera, it turns out, has written a screenplay. So it's not like she has been attached now as the screenwriter. It's just her involvement has been announced now officially, but she was already clearly involved long ago, long enough ago that she has already written the screenplay. And James Gunn posted about how happy he is with the screenplay. He loves it and stuff. I mean, of course, he will say that he's the head of studio, but yeah, for those of you who don't know, Anna Noguera is primarily known as an actress, both from like film and TV and from stage actress. In fact, if you look at her stage work, one thing that pops out is she was the original Eliza Hamilton. Not in the sense of like the original Broadway Eliza Hamilton, that is, of course, Philippa Sue, and not even before that when Hamilton was on off Broadway. Right at the beginning, when it was first performed at a workshop, the Vassar workshop, she premiered the role of Eliza Hamilton. So that's interesting. In fact, that was the production where my namesake Utkarsh Ambudkar did the role of Aaron Burr instead of Leslie Odom Jr. So yeah, pretty like two people who would go on to more famous works later started at that Vassar production in roles that would not end up being theirs, unfortunately. Well, I say unfortunately, but I mean, I think everyone's happy Leslie Odom Jr. ended up being Aaron Burr. Sir, sorry about that. Anyway, she is now also a playwright. She had her own play. I think it's called Which Way to the Stage, something like that. That premiered last year, I think. And yeah, she is now debuting as a screenwriter. In fact, it turns out that if you follow DC movies at all, before this whole reboot was planned, before James Gunn and Peter Safran were brought in to reboot the DCU, they in the DCEU there were plans to make a Supergirl movie. They were already in development on a Supergirl movie that was going to spin out of The Flash with Sasha Cali uh, playing Supergirl and continuing her portrayal from that movie. And in that version of the Supergirl movie, they had already hired Anna Noguera. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. They had hired her to write the screenplay for that, but of course, that project ended up being shelved and uh, cancelled. Really, I shouldn't say shelved, but when James Gunn and Peter Safran decided to make a Supergirl movie in their own universe as well, Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, they, it seems, read what she had done for the older version, for Sasha Cali's version, and they must have really loved it because clearly that made them decide that, okay, we should get her to write this new Supergirl for us as well. And yeah, she's now done that, and that's going to be the movie we get. And if you might be thinking, okay, why is this relevant? Superhero movies have not been all that good for the last couple of years. They're sort of starting to fade out from the kind of pop culture stronghold they had between like 2008 and 2021 ish. I mean, you can move around those two walls I just set as much as you like, but that seems to me to be roughly the time when that genre was dominating. But the thing that interests me about Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow is not just that, it's a superhero movie, it's an upcoming DC movie. I'm particularly interested in following the development of this movie and seeing how it is when it comes out, because it is not just any superhero movie. It is a Tom King adaptation. Uh, if you don't follow superhero comics, that's pretty significant, or just comic books in general, because ever since, so over the last decade or so, ever since 2015, comic books have sort of, the comic book industry has sort of been like Tom King's world and everyone else is just living in it. That is hyperbole. He has had his own misses as well. But when he has hit, he has really hit. He established himself with the Omega Men, and then got himself into the Hall of Fame with The Vision, which is, in my opinion, one of the best comics Marvel has ever published. And yeah, he's just a really excellent writer when it comes to digging into a character's psychology and creating poetry out of their turmoil. And yeah, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow is one of his hits, one of his great uh, comic book miniseries. Miniseries is the form where he shines the most. And I'm really excited to see it come to the big screen. So yeah, this that was the first tidbit. The second smaller item of news that I want to talk about is Napoleon has screened. Ridley Scott's Joaquin Phoenix starrer, uh, Joaquin Phoenix and Vanessa Kirby starrer Napoleon, which is due to release in, I think, less than 2 weeks from now. Yeah, somewhere between 1 and 2 weeks. That film had been, I can't say highly anticipated, but anticipated. There were some doubts because Ridley Scott's recent films have been a little hit or miss. In fact, recently he had two movies come out a month apart from each other, The Last Duel and House of Gucci, and that itself was a bit of a hit or miss because people generally seem to like The Last Duel and not so much House of Gucci. So there were doubts about how this would turn out, but the trailers looked epic and people were really anticipating this. And now it has had its first screening, its world premiere, and reviews are coming out, and uh, they are nice. They're positive, on the positive side of things at least. Um, but the interesting bit of what's coming out now to me stems from the two cuts situation. Now, Ridley Scott, of course, is very well known for doing multiple cuts of movies, for going back to movies he's already made because he feels like he can do better. Which was the case with Blade Runner, of course, which got 5 cuts over the years, and it was the case with Kingdom of Heaven. But with Napoleon, that is not what's happening because you might have heard the news that it's getting a director's cut, which is going to release on Apple TV Plus a couple of months after its theatrical release. But that is not a situation of, the theatrical release already came out and it had issues, and then years later, Ridley Scott says, "No, I think I can do better," and the studio interfered, and here's what my version would be. This is a pre-planned director's cut. They already announced more than a month before the release of the movie that there are going to be 2 cuts. One will be in theaters, one will be on Apple TV Plus, which is not something you see a lot when it comes to director's cut situations. And what I think is happening here is, and it is what I thought was happening right from the moment when I first heard the news, was especially when I heard that the director's cut is going to be 4 hours and 10 minutes, is that is the director's cut is the movie Ridley Scott made. He shot Napoleon, he edited it, and what he ended up with was a 4-hour movie. And Apple TV was like, "Sure, great, wonderful, we'll take it." But his theatrical distributor, Sony, must have, I'm presuming, thought, "Yeah, no, Ridley, we need to talk because uh, this is no longer 1939. We're not in the era of Gone with the Wind, where if you can release a 4-hour movie in theaters and it becomes the highest grossing movie of all time. Yeah, you can't do that anymore. You have to worry about, you'll only be able to do 2 to 3, even 3 will be a bit of a struggle, assuming you put in an intermission, which you'll have to do for a 4-hour movie. Without an intermission, maybe you can fit 3. With an intermission, you'll probably just be restricted to 2 screenings of the movie in any given hall in a day. And even with those screenings, it'll be difficult to pack the halls because it, it's difficult to incentivize people to or to convince people to come out of their homes and go to the theater to watch a 4-hour movie when they know that they can just wait a few months and then watch it on Apple TV Plus. So it was so they must have realized that's a difficult sell, and so they were like, yeah, no, you will need to bring it under a quarter to 3 hours, and that's the only way we're going to release your movie. And so Ridley Scott must have chopped the movie up into something that does not represent his whatever his artistic vision was, and ended up with like a 2 or 40-minute movie, which is what's coming to theaters. And the reason I bring up that suspicion, which I had when the news came out, is because now that the reviews are coming out, that's exactly what you're hearing. There are people who have more mixed reviews, like David Ehrlich of IndieWire, uh, and he's of course talking about how one of the big criticisms he has of the movie is that it feels choppy. There are times where you can feel while going from one scene to the next that clearly there was stuff that happened in between, significant stuff that was the connective tissue between these scenes that has been cut out. It feels weird. But even critics who are more positive on the movie, who have really liked the movie, are still saying that, yeah, you know what, it will clearly be better in the director's cut. This is not quite it. And yeah, so seeing those reviews has convinced me I'm not going to go to the theater for this, which is kind of a bummer because it has all those grand epic visuals. I would have liked to see those on the big screen, but I don't want my first experience of the movie to be in this chopped up version. Yeah, and I'm just going to wait for the Apple version. But isn't it kind of interesting that this keeps happening with Napoleon movies? Because if you look at like greatest films of all time lists, you'll come across the 1927 Abel Gance Napoleon, which was like a 7-hour epic. Today, if you look it up, you'll find a 5.5-hour version, but that's only because some of the footage has been lost. So, literally, while you're watching the movie, there are uh, intertitles in between that explain that there was supposed to be a scene here where these are the characters and this is what happens, and that scene has been lost, and then the movie continues as normal. So that was supposed to be long, but obviously no theater was going to release a 7-hour movie, and you could cut it up into episodes, but at the time there weren't TVs to air TV shows, and I'm guessing Abel Gance didn't want his movie to become one of those serials where those theatrical serials they used to have back then, where you would have each episode play before another feature film. He probably wanted it to be seen as like the feature. And so he ended up having to chop that movie up into a shorter version that apparently was not good. And why would it be? If your film is the longer version, then the shorter version is not going to flow well. And yeah, it's history repeating itself, it seems, which is depressing. But what can you do? Ridley Scott seems to be a little bit off his game now. And I love his older stuff, so that's a little sad to see. But anyway, moving on to the last bit of minor news. This is hardly even news. This is just something I found funny that happened recently. Was Christopher Nolan was talking about the upcoming Blu-ray release of Oppenheimer, and he made the remark that uh, like he's encouraging people, please go and buy Oppenheimer on Blu-ray to watch it at home, uh, instead of just relying on streaming services, so that no evil streaming services can steal it from you. Which I just think is so. I mean, first of all, I just love that a filmmaker, a major filmmaker whose voice is heard by so many people, is saying it, because, yeah, we do need physical media to be a more prominent part of how people watch movies. And I'm saying that for myself as well. I don't use physical media, and I should get on that, because uh, digital media is so. out of our control unless you're a pirate. It is just whether you're talking about directly streaming from streaming services or buying digital copies of movies. All of that stuff is still completely in the distributor's control. So they can modify it, they can tweak the movie you're watching, and whenever they feel like it, they can just take it away. They can make it vanish from the service. And in fact, if you remember recently, Disney Plus and of course Max, because why would Max do any art friendly decisions? But Disney Plus and Max have both done this thing of taking original films and TV shows that have been released only to their services and removing them from their services completely, so that we're left in a world where there is no legal way to watch them anymore. And if you make physical media more of a prominent thing, more of a common way that films are distributed, if we buy a lot of physical media, if we show there's demand for it, and we make it so that studios release whatever they're releasing, uh, both in theaters or streaming services wherever they're releasing it, and also on physical media, then what happens is that even if they decide to pull it off their streaming service later, whoever already bought the physical copies still has them. So the thing at least still exists, which is very important for art preservation. But clearly, that is not a priority for studios right now. And I'm glad that Nolan called it out. That was fun. So anyway, that puts an end to these minor things I wanted to bring up, and now I have to come to more major and serious and important news. And this last piece of news that I want to discuss concerns the IDFA, which, you know what, let me just read the full form here. It is the International Documentary Festival Amsterdam. So this was recently happening, might still be happening actually. I haven't checked the dates, but oh yeah, okay, it is still happening for a couple more days. So it has been happening for a few days now in Amsterdam, and it is the biggest documentary film festival in the world. And at this festival, uh, when the head of the festival was giving an address, I think a few protesters got on stage and started chanting the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." And then what happened is basically what's been happening in many countries whenever anyone dares to say something as basic as Palestine should be free. They're not saying, take like think about that, what the content of what they're saying. They're not saying glory to Hamas, they're not saying deaths to Jews, they're not even saying more like banal academic statements like Israel is a settler colonial state or Israel is not a legitimate state or things like that. They're just saying Palestine should be free. One of the easiest things that it one of the easiest things anyone should be able to agree to. But as we've seen that whenever someone says even something as basic as that, there is censure, and that's what happened at the IDFA. They put out a strong condemnation of that, and they said that we are not okay with that kind of speech. So, weird understanding of freedom of speech, but that is a kind of speech that they're not okay with in their civil debate, whatever they consider civil debate in that festival's organizing committee. So the news part here is not just that all this happened. The news part here is actually want to share some good news. I mean, I don't know about good, but at least inspiring news, which is that uh, 12 filmmakers, in protest of what the IDFA was doing there, withdrew their films from the festival. uh, in order to support the freedom of protesters to be able to talk about Palestinian issues. Um, and let's just take that in for a moment. This is huge. We are talking about, we're not talking about like, you know, an Alfonso Cuarón or Ridley Scott who is taking their huge movie to Venice. Those filmmakers who have 100 different avenues where they can still show off their movie if they don't get the first avenue that they wanted to go to. We're talking about documentary filmmakers whose movies are anyway not very widely watched, who struggle, who have to fight to get a spot in any film festival, let alone the biggest documentary film festival in the world. And these people, for whom so much of the exposure that they need as filmmakers, that their films need in order to succeed, depended on being screened at this festival, they made the insanely brave decision to take their films out of that festival because their festivals are bigger than their need. And that blows my mind. It's insanely inspiring. The whole following the whole trajectory of what's been happening in Palestine, the ethnic cleansing, the genocide, there it is easy to get overwhelmed with the rage and depression of it all, and can't blame anyone for getting overwhelmed. In fact, if it is just rage, that's actually a good thing. We need more rage in the world. But I do think that uh, everywhere you look, you can also find these stories of just boundless courage, and it is really inspiring. And I hope more of us are able I mean, those of us who have any ability to be influential in these situations are able to make the right choice even in the face of such odds being stacked against us. So yeah, what do you think of that? Let me know in the comments how you feel. But yeah, I just thought that's extremely inspiring. And yeah, that wraps up all the major news items from the last couple of days that I wanted to cover, and leaves me with uh, something I want to spend a couple of minutes on before wrapping up this podcast slash video thingy that I have been doing, which is what I've been watching. So uh, eh, I I do intend to make this, of course, and in the series, I want to keep this final segment just to talk about either new release or any classics that I'd never watched that I'm finally getting to catch up on, that I have recently watched and what I thought about it. And uh, today, thankfully, I'm talking about something that I really loved, and so let's call it a recommendation in this case. I am so happy to recommend to you The Curse. Now, this is the new A24 TV show co-created by Nathan Fielder and Benny Safdie. Benny Safdie of course, the Safdie brothers. If you followed their work, they made Uncut Gems. Before that, they made Good Time with Robert Pattinson. And they're generally known for their anxiety cinema. And while they work in the realm of fiction, in the non-fiction side, when it comes to anxiety and discomfort and unease, a name that has often been talked about is Nathan Fielder, who created the nonfiction shows Nathan for You and The Rehearsal. And I had not checked out either of those two shows, despite hearing just the most brilliant things about them. I tend to be more of a fiction viewing person, though I do really, really want to watch The Rehearsal. Um, but yeah, finally, by watching the first episode of The Curse, I have stepped into Nathan Fielder's work. I have popped my Nathan Fielder cherry, as one might say. No, no one would say that. But yeah, it stars Emma Stone along with the two creators, Nathan Fielder and Benny Safdie, in supporting roles. Well, actually, Benny Safdie is a supporting role, but Nathan Fielder and Emma Stone are both pretty much the leads of the show. And it is so uncomfortable in such a brilliant way. Is it's basically about this couple which is presenting itself as this very progressive, very uh, activist-ish couple that's using their resources and whatever power they have to better the lives of the community, of the common man. And in as we watch the episode, it's an hour-long episode, and as we keep watching, more and more we realize that uh, this might actually be kind of hollow. And uh, that's not me going into the premise right now, and specifically like what the curse is, what the inciting incident is, but it's just this comedy, this black comedy satire that is really piercing and just makes you cringe a lot at a lot of the decisions that these characters are making, and the just just the stuff that they're saying, and you're like, no, you don't say that, and stuff like that, the way you were probably feeling when you watched Adam Sandler throw his life away in Uncut Gems. So it's a lot of that, but also with a lot of like really interesting commentary on like reality shows. And not, well, do they count as reality shows? I don't know, but like a certain kind of non-fiction show where with commentary on how things are presented to us in ways that make the people involved look the nicest. uh, yeah, everything I've said sounds very generic, but take my word for it, it's brilliant. Please check it out. It's airing weekly, which I like. I'm not a fan of instantaneous drops. It's going to be a 10 episode season, and I think it's supposed to be a mini series, so it's going to be a 10 episode series. Uh, and yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts if you watch it. Uh, and that will be all for my show. Thank you for tuning in, or for watching later if that's what you do. And let me know anything you would like me to do differently in future episodes. Thank you. Goodbye.